There it is. So this is going to be the first session of the course From Singleness to Oneness, Embracing the Marriage Designed by God. This training was designed after several years, over a decade of working with couples in different types of situations in their marriages, that led me to discover that many people were struggling with the relationship because they did not have understanding of how God had designed marriage to be. And eventually, all these sessions became one course that I've been using for several years now, both in preparing couples and also helping couples in crisis. And these sessions are going to be recorded in Zoom, so you will be able to access them later, as well as if you miss any of the sessions that we do on Mondays. Before we enter into the actual study, let me just tell you the system. Okay, you are going to have the notes that you will be able to access and keep with you to review later. In those notes, you are going to have some homework that you will be able to do as well. So have your notes, then attend the Zoom session. If you cannot attend a Zoom session, you will be able to access it later as well. But ideally, attend the session. And after the session, the homework that is left is meant for you to interact with either your spouse or your fiance and do the homework both individually and then together, so that you can discover what were the things, the insights you gain from the particular topic. Some of the topics are going to be much more robust. Some others will be more brief. So some sessions will have more homework that you will have to do on your own than others. Hopefully, and thankfully, the first session is a light one. You won't have to do too much work after it, okay? But that's the way the system works. Have the notes, attend the Zoom session, and then after that, do the homework so that you can gain the principles and apply them in the relationship that you have. Also, the whole framework for this training is from biblical theology, is bringing the Bible, what we learn from God about marriage from the Bible, and putting it together into this system. So we're going to be reading different parts of the Bible as well as we go through this. Now, you do not have to be a Christian or believe in the Bible to benefit from these principles, because you will, as you will realize as we go through it, the things that you will learn are so relevant and so applicable to your own life. So you're going to get lots of wisdom through this whole thing. So with that introduction, let's start with the first topic today, which is embracing the call to oneness. One thing that you need to understand is that when you become married, you have a model in your mind of what marriage is supposed to be like, how it's supposed to function. But that model that you have in your mind, you either learn it from your parents or you learn it from somebody else. And you may come to the relationship with one model, and your fiance or your spouse may come to the marriage with a whole different model, and you do not know that until you start trying to make this thing work, only to realize that you have two completely different understandings of how this thing is supposed to work. You know, imagine two people that come and want to play a sport together, and they want to have fun together. So one brings basketball and the other one brings a golf ball, and it's like, well, we both have a ball, and this is how you play basketball, and you try to use the golf ball to do that. And it's like, no, you don't, it doesn't work that way. And suddenly it's like your intentions to have fun together turns out to be very frustrating, because at that moment you realize, oh, we're talking about two completely different sports. So what happens in marriage is that a big part of what you will struggle with is because you are not coming together with the same model. So the question becomes, where do we get our model from? Where should we get that model from? So we are going to compare three different models that people have in marriage. Two of them are common ways people think about marriage. But the third one will be the biblical one, the one that the Bible teaches about marriage. And we will contrast how those three operate differently. So let's start with the first two models, okay? The first one of those models is what I call the partnership model. The partnership model uses this mathematical equation that says 1 + 1 = what? 2, right? Right. That's obvious. 1 + 1 = 2. So we are two single people. We now become married. So we now are two individuals. And the way that we see the relationship is very much defined like a business partnership. Look at what the notes say. It's very, very, very like right to the point. This person thinks like this. I have my money, I have my job, I have my goals. You have your money, your job, and your goals. Let's become married like partners so we can gain better profit and be happy. But if you fail to lead me to a life of success, then I will end my partnership with you and find another partner that will take me to the successful life I want. So this person is thinking about the other person in the relationship like a business partner. We're going to join our resources and our plans to reach the life of success we want. And this model is characterized by using the words mine, yours, you, me. It's very much like two separate people just having a partnership. And what happens with a business partnership? If you're investing with a partner and then your partner is not, moving this business forward, what do? You end the partnership, right? And that's exactly how the person is going to think of this marriage. I will end it the moment you are no longer taking me to the life I was dreaming of. So that is the partnership model. It's very pragmatic, very utilitarian. It sees the marriage as a platform to achieve a future of success. The second model is similar, but different. The second model is what I call the 50-50 model. It is similar to the first one in that it thinks 1 + 1 = 2. We're two single people, we get married, and now we also have, the resources and the goals, and we're going to try to make this thing work. But the difference is that this couple strongly adds the mathematical equation of 50-50, right? So it's like two people, let's divide everything in half. So 50-50. And this is how the person thinks. It says, I will pay half of the bills and you will pay the other half. I will own half of our possessions, you own the other half. I take care of the children half of the time and you take care of them half of the time. If this marriage does not work, easy. We will divide everything 50-50. And that's how the person thinks. See, so if you are the one that is, wanting to have cable and I don't like cable, well, then you pay it with your money. And I will pay, the internet with my money. And we keep, bills separate because this is my stuff, that is your stuff. And both models are functioning with a strong division that shows that they have never realized that marriage is not just 1 + 1 = 2. Marriage is a change of identity. And they have never shifted from the identity that they had as a single person to the identity that they had as a married person. What does that mean, an identity? Well, you see, let me put it like this. If you look at this picture, you have two colors. One is red, the other one is blue. So imagine that I am the red and my wife is the blue. So when I was single, I thought like red, I acted like a red person, and I like red things. When my wife was single, she acted like blue, she liked blue things, and she was blue. So when we got married, in these models that we just described, these people are thinking, sure, let's be together. I'm still red, you're still blue. Let's try to make this thing work. So I have my red stuff, you have your blue stuff. And they live with that dichotomy, with that separation of identity that never changed. Now they have a partnership called marriage, but they don't have a new identity. And that is why these two models eventually will fail, because it will never lead you to oneness, because you will always feel treated like the other one, and I am this one. The identity of oneness was never developed. So rather than thinking of marriage as a partnership or as a mathematical equation that says 1 + 1 = 2, oneness is a complete different approach. And this is where, if you are going to enter into marriage, or if you have already been married, you need to pay attention to this mindset. Because in the short term, you will think, well, this works, but in the long term, it won't. Let me tell you why. Rather than thinking of marriage as 1 + 1 = 2, God talks about marriage with a whole different perspective. It's a whole different mathematical equation. It's 1 + 1 = 1. You say, what? How could that be? That makes no sense. How could 1 + 1 = 1? Well, in amounts of things, does not work that way. But in the dimension of being, it does. Let me put it this way. You have the red and you have the blue. When they become married, now they enter a process in which they need to embrace a new identity. It's no longer red, it's no longer blue, but it's purple. Because as they come together, they are together bringing who they are to now create a whole new identity that they had never experienced before. And you say, well, that makes sense. Yeah, if I mix red and blue, it becomes purple. I told you, 1 + 1 = 1. And here you have two colors that became one color, a whole different new reality. You see? This is what marriage is meant to be. It's not just a change of legal status, but it's a change of identity. And as long as you live your marriage thinking that you can continue acting and prioritizing the lifestyle of the red or the blue and never learn what purple is like, then you will never experience oneness. So when you think of marriage, therefore, you need to think of a change of identity in which I need to learn to function in a way that I never functioned before. I need to learn to start thinking and acting like purple. So that imagery is the imagery that is going to follow us throughout the whole system of oneness that we're going to be doing all of these sessions. So where do we get this idea of oneness? Let me take you to something that Lord Jesus said when the religious leaders approached him to ask him a question about marriage. They were trying to trick him by asking him a question that was going to put him in a corner. They wanted to ask him a question about divorce because there was a political leader that was in an adulterous relationship and had divorced his wife to marry his lover. So they thought, if we get Jesus to speak publicly about this, maybe we'll get him killed, because this guy had killed John the Baptist. So he was a political leader that had lots of power. So in that way of trying to trick him, they asked him about a question about marriage and divorce. And when Jesus answers, he tells them something about what was already written in the scriptures, and he's going to quote the book of Genesis. And this is what Jesus tells them. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh? Now that's the end of the citation, okay? Here he's saying, haven't you read what God said when he invented marriage? Because at the beginning of Genesis, when it says that God created humans, and when he created marriage, it says there what he said. And that's what Jesus is citing here. But after that, Jesus adds in verse 6, says, so they are no longer two, but what? One. Therefore, what God has joined together, let me not separate. And that's the end of the response. So Jesus was very wise, and the Bible says that Jesus knew what people were thinking without them telling him. So he knew the intentions of the heart. So he knew that these guys were trying to trick him, and he does not engage at all with going into the rabbit trail that they wanted him to go to. He simply addressed the question by citing the very scriptures that these religious leaders supposedly believed in. But something that is interesting, and you already saw it, but I'm going to highlight it here, is that Jesus specifies here that once you enter marriage, your identity changes. You are no longer two, now you are one. And that change of identity is the one that we need to experience and pursue and learn as we enter into this new reality. Because the bottom line is that as long as I'm married, yet I'm functioning like we are two separate, complete separate people, where it's me and you, mine and yours, my plans, your plans, and everything is separated like that, you will never be able to experience the oneness that Jesus talked about. Because you will continue thinking that you were two before, you continue being two today. So remember, this is not an equation of amounts or numbers, it's an equation of being, where now this mindset is going to start shaping the way I think and act on marriage. So for you guys that have never been married, basically, what you need to learn in this entire process is that you will have to start learning how to speak and think and act purple. But the challenge is that you have never learned that. All your life until this point, you've been either blue or red. So that's why we're going to walk this journey together to start realizing, okay, what are the dimensions that this oneness touches on? And therefore, the course is going to dissect this oneness into 4 areas. And I define oneness as the maximum level of cohesion that two people can reach. So this oneness is that maximum level of cohesion where we're no longer two but one, that these two people that come into marriage can reach. And it's experienced in these four areas. What is the spiritual dimension, the emotional dimension, the physical dimension, and the legal dimension? And we're going to go into that entire system at every lesson. We will start on the spiritual, through emotional, through physical, through legal. The spiritual category deals with what is the structure and direction of marriage. Many people that lack spiritual oneness, they express it this way. They say, you know what? My spouse doesn't respect me. You know, my spouse is controlling. You know, my voice doesn't matter in this relationship. And they express the frustration of the relationship in these terms. And what they lack is spiritual oneness. That's why they're expressing it that way. In other words, the structural issues of the relationship are not right. The second category, which is the emotional oneness, deals with the interaction. This is the dimension in which we learn to live together in a way that is edifying. People that lack emotional oneness typically express it by saying, you know what, we are not as close as we used to be. Or, you know, my spouse doesn't love me. And there's this increasing sense of distance that you are growing apart from each other, that lack of closeness. And that is a lack of emotional oneness. The third category is physical oneness, which deals with the dimension of sexuality in marriage. People that are suffering in physical oneness typically express the lack of oneness by saying things like, you know, we hardly ever have sex in our relationship now. If I don't take initiative, nothing ever happens. Or my spouse does things that makes me feel uncomfortable, but I do not know how to tell him or tell her that I don't like that. And there's a sense of sexuality being a burden rather than a blessing. It's something dirty, something rather than something holy. And rather than edifying the relationship, it's a point of contention and manipulation. That is because that couple lacks physical oneness. And then the fourth category is legal oneness. This is the dimension that deals with the boundaries of marriage and divorce. People that lack legal oneness typically express that lack of oneness by saying things like, you know, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to stay in this relationship. Oh, my spouse says that one more time, I'm out of here. And typically this couple, when they got married, they had this little disclaimer at the end that, yeah, I love you. Yeah, I have these vows to be married to you. But if things don't work out as I want them, I'm out of here, you know, and therefore they live that marriage always with the fear that they don't want to do something that will cause the other spouse to overreact and leave. And therefore they are never experiencing oneness because they're always driven by fear rather than by love. So in all of these areas, you need to learn to think purple. How does spiritual oneness, emotional oneness, physical oneness, and legal oneness operate in marriage? If you're able to discern these things, understand them, and make the corrective changes to your relationship, then you are going to be on the path to a thriving marriage. However, if you do not give enough attention to any of these four areas, eventually your relationship is going to crack. and you're going to enter into a crisis that you never thought could be possible. So these are the areas in which we are going to be working on. But as we continue, let me do a little true or false here. Okay, so you get to answer it where you are. Now, remember that these notes are written from the perspective of a couple that is already married. Notes. Some of you are engaged in the process of becoming married. So just change the wording for you, right? If instead of being my spouse would be my fiance, my marriage would be my relationship, right? But the principles will apply. Now, some of these exercises will not apply to you because you're not married yet, but they will apply later. However, they are meant to give you a sense of thinking how these concepts look like in real life, okay? So let me start with the first one. True or false? My spouse and I have separate bank accounts. I manage my money, my spouse manages his or her money. Separate bank accounts. I pay some bills with my money, my spouse pays some bills with her money. My career goals are more important to me than my marriage. If you had to choose between the two, which one would you choose? Well, my career, of course, more important. Next one. When my life goals are not compatible with my spouse's, I give priority to my plans. Why? Because, they're the more important ones. True or false? Next one. My opinion and desires should be more important because I make the most money. True or false? Well, I pay the bills here, so you better shut up and do what I say. Is that how it works? And last one, I often spend time with friends that are not friends of both of us. You have relationships that were the red and blue relationships, but you have no purple relationships. There's no purple friends. Therefore, you spend more time with friends that are not friends of both of you. True or false? Okay. The way you answer to these questions or these assertions is going to start revealing a little bit what model is shaping the way you are building your marriage. Now, let's continue to the next part of the session. If you notice, what Jesus said in his description of the design for marriage based on Genesis and then his own input there, he did not only say that the two will become one, and therefore talking about marriage as a change of identity and oneness, but he talked about this aspect of relationship as a process. And we're going to take a look at that process because he starts with the people when they're single and he eventually ends with them as experiencing oneness. The two become one. What is that process? What are the steps that these people need to take from moving from being two to being one? Let's take a look at what Jesus said. Now, the text is in your notes as well, so you can always go back and read it, but I'm going to only highlight here the sections one by one. The first thing that Jesus said is that for this reason, these two single people that want to get married have to now go through a process of transformation. And the first step in that transformation, he says, they will leave who? Yeah, father and mother. The first step in the process of becoming one is the ability of cutting the umbilical cord with your parents. It's a change of relationship that has very interesting dynamics. Now, the text doesn't tell us more about it, but based on the years of experience that I have with couples that have been struggling in marriage, I discovered there are three areas in which couples fail to leave father and mother. And they are never, therefore, able to experience oneness, because without realizing it, the relationship with the father and the mother is always competing with the relationship with the spouse. And because the spouse feels that there's a competition between whose voice matters most, then the spouse never feels like oneness. It always feels like a separate individual, like an attachment to the family rather than a marriage with oneness. These are the three areas in which I have seen couples fail to leave father and mother. The first one is that you have to experience a change of priority. In other words, now the relationship with your spouse is priority. Therefore, your spouse's voice and needs are the most important ones. When you were single, perhaps what your parents said, that's what you did. Their opinion mattered, and that's what you listened to, and that's what you did. But now you have a spouse, and your parents still sees you as their child, and sometimes they still see you as their baby. So they have a hard time letting the child go, and they try to keep the relationship like they always did. Therefore, they expect that their voice and their opinion is going to have the heaviest weight. But that's not the case. If you are going to experience oneness, there's only one voice that matters most than any other, apart from God's, and that is your spouse. That's the first one. The second one, change of loyalty. Change of loyalty. This is when I realized that before, my loyalty was towards my parents. There was no competing loyalty at all. But sometimes in marriage, things happen in which there's loyalties that are tested. And at some moments when you have to take sides, you always take sides with your spouse, because that's the person that you are called to be one with, not your parents. You're not called to be one with your parents. You're called to honor your parents, but you're called to be one with your spouse. And unless what is at stake is something that is on the wrong aspect, like it's right or wrong, then of course you don't take sides with your spouse if you're going to be siding on the wrong side of issues, right? But if it's not a right or wrong, and it's just an issue of taking sides, every time that you do not take sides with your spouse will feel that there's no oneness, because you are not in my team, you are in their team, and it feels terrible. Think about this, for instance. Thanksgiving is coming, and my wife says, oh, you know what? We've been going in and out, entertaining people here and there. I just would love to spend Thanksgiving at home, just us and the kids, no one else. Forget about inviting people and having a meal and cooking, none of that stuff. I'm really tired. It will be great if we can be home, just us. Great. Well, then my mom calls me and says, hey, Pablo, your dad and I were talking about Thanksgiving plans, and we would love for you guys to come over. We haven't seen you in a while. We would love to see the kids. Oops. What do I do? You see, if I don't understand oneness, this is what I would do. Well, then my parents, their desire has priority, they matter more than my wife. Therefore, sure, Mom, we'll spend Thanksgiving with you. I'll tell Sarah, and then that's what we'll do. Forget about even asking. Let me ask my wife first to see what she thinks. No, not even that. And then later I go to my wife and say, Hey, by the way, we're going to spend Thanksgiving with my parents this season. What? But I thought we just talked about that earlier. Didn't you hear me? It's like, yeah, but then my mom called me and said that they wanted us over, so we'll go over. You see the problem? This person has never cut the umbilical cord with the parents and has never had the change of priority or loyalty in place. And as long as this continues to be the dynamic in the marriage, there's no oneness. The last one is the change of dependency. As we will learn later in the aspect of oneness, emotional oneness, financial independence is very important for oneness. When we were kids, our parents, if you have, good close parents that were supportive, they paid for everything, and they sent you to college, and and they were very supportive. Then you got married, they helped with the wedding, maybe with the car, maybe with the down payment for the house, you name it. They were very supportive. And it's nice to have supportive parents, but that is not the same as to be dependent on my parents. And there are couples that they never cut the financial umbilical cord with the parents. And every time that there's a crisis financially, they're always going to ask for help to be rescued financially from where they're at. Always running to daddy and mommy to just please rescue me once more because I cannot make it on my own. And when that continues to be the case, that oneness in the relationship is undermined. You know why? It's because one of the things that we will learn later in emotional oneness is that one of the important aspects of my role as a husband is to give my wife the assurance that I am a stable provider. And if I am not a stable provider, doesn't matter if both of us work and if both of us contribute, doesn't matter. She needs for me as her husband to communicate to her that I am a trustworthy provider. But when I am not a trustworthy provider because instead I'm always being rescued by my parents, I'm not giving my wife the opportunity to grow in that oneness with me because I'm not acting in oneness. So I encourage you to think about this because I do not know what is the financial relationship you have with your parents. You've been single this far. Maybe they've been very supportive. I do not know your story there. But one thing that I want you to understand is that you need to leave father and mother, and there's a financial dimension to that. I'm not saying do not receive their help when help is needed, or do not value their support, but do not depend on them to sustain your marriage. You need to work hard at becoming self-sustainable. So, very little phrase that Jesus said. First thing that you need to do is leave father and mother. But it's much harder to leave father and mother than we realize. And one day, you will have your child that will become married. And when that child becomes married, the best thing that you can do as a parent is to let that child cut the umbilical cord and not be the obstacle that the child has to be able to experience oneness in their own relationship. So first phrase, leave father and mother. So question for you is, have you left father and mother? Is your fiance or your spouse the one that has the priority, whose voice matters the most, the one to whom you are the most loyal? And have you cut the financial dependency from your parents? If the answer is no to any of those, then you have homework to do. because this is an area in which you will need to mature if you are to experience oneness. The second thing that Jesus said was that after you leave father and mother, then you will be united to your spouse. At that moment, you're no longer single, but now you are married. You see, if I am not married, I can introduce my girlfriend as, hey, that's my girlfriend, or my fiance as, hey, that's my fiance. But I cannot introduce that person as my spouse. I cannot say, hey, this is my wife. Why? Well, because we're not married, right? In order for her to be my wife, we first have to be married. Otherwise, she's not my wife. And why am I saying this? Is because Jesus says very clearly that there's a process. You leave your father and mother, and then you unite yourself to whom? To your spouse. Not to your boyfriend, not to your fiance, but to your spouse. And this is something that in contemporary culture, people don't give much priority to or listen to very carefully. Let me show you what the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. It says this: marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. This passage tells us that God has an opinion about marriage and about sexuality in marriage, because he invented marriage, remember? And he designed us as sexual beings. He designed sex. So here he designed marriage, he designed sex, therefore he has a strong opinion about both. And he says, look, when it comes to marriage, I want you to honor it. You need to think of marriage as something honorable, not as, oh, are you really gonna get married? Oh man, I'm so sorry for you, you know? No, where marriage is something honorable, it's something good. And as far as sex, he has an opinion as well. He says sex should be kept pure, the marriage bed kept pure. Now, this is not talking about a piece of furniture in your bedroom. It's not talking about the bed in your bedroom. It's talking about sexuality in marriage in a very poetic way. It's saying sex needs to be reserved for marriage, because that is the purpose for which I created it. So you see, that says honor marriage and keep sex within the boundaries of that marriage. But if you do not honor marriage and you do not keep sexuality within those boundaries, then you're going to become an adulterer, and then you're going to become a sexually immoral person, and therefore I will have to judge you because you're an adulterer and you're sexually immoral. It's very interesting that God talks about this very clearly, boom, very specifically. It's like there's no much to it, it's right there. But because we do not understand these things, and we do not know God or his word, and we do not understand his design for marriage, then we do it our way. And the popular way thinks completely differently about this. This is what they think. If I could rephrase this passage from the Bible into how a contemporary culture would like to read it, this is what it will read like. Marriage should be the last resort, and the marriage bed tested in advance to ensure you're both compatible. For God says that as long as you love each other, everything is fine. That's how they want to read it. And therefore, that's how they act. You meet your boyfriend, you meet your girlfriend. Hey, you like each other? First thing you start doing is having sex. Forget about even being engaged. Now that we're engaged, we are already moving together. Forget about getting married. Who needs to get married? We're already living together. We're already having sex. We're already sharing the bills. And by the way, you just got pregnant. So now we already have the kids. So why even get married? What's the point? And that is how they are trying to build their way to oneness, only to realize too late, later in their lives, that they will never be able to experience oneness because they started completely the wrong way. They did not honor marriage, and they did not keep sexuality for that relationship. So God designed marriage, and He says, look, the first thing you will do, you need to change that relationship with your parents. The second thing you need to do is to be united to your spouse in a way that you're honoring marriage and keeping sexuality for marriage. One of the downsides of not doing this process this way, if you are living together without being married, and if you are having sex without being married, is that without realizing it, many couples in that situation are building a foundation that is not built on love, but is built on fear, is built on selfishness. And that fear and that selfishness will eventually erode the relationship. However, love is different because love puts the needs of the other person before mine. And that's why I'm going to wait until we are married to engage with you sexually. That's why I'm going to wait after we are married to really move in together. Because if you don't do that, fear and selfishness will permeate the relationship. Many of the couples involved in that situation, they're just testing the waters. They're having sex with you to see if they really like you. And they move in with you to see if this thing works out. Why? Because if it doesn't, I'm out. You see? Rather than entering into this relationship with you because I love you, and no matter what, we're going to make it work. It's a whole different dynamic. See? So that's why this is so important. Jesus said the first step is leave father and mother, then be united to your wife, not to your girlfriend, not to your boyfriend, not to your fiance. And the third one, he says, then the two will become one. You see, in order to get there, you have to first go to the first two stages. Does that make sense? So it's a process. You want to become one, leave father and mother first, then get married and honor marriage and keep sexuality within that boundary. But then he tells us a fourth step, and he says, what God has joined, let men not separate. He says, look, now that you are one, you need to cover that oneness with the understanding that you are not entering this relationship with the intention of ever getting divorced. You are not entering the relationship with a little disclaimer. Have you ever watched one of those commercials that talk about, promoting some kind of medicine for some kind of condition? They show all the happy people smiling and, doing sports and spending time with the kids, and everything is happy. And they tell you all the benefits of the medicine. But the last 30 seconds of the commercial, they're going to tell you all the disclaimer and go super quick. This is going to kill you. It can produce cancer. It can damage your liver. Consult your doctor very well before you do it because it may not work for you. And it gives you all this disclaimer. And that commercial is a picture of how some couples will enter marriage. You're entering marriage with a happy face. Hey, everything nice. I love you. We're going to be happy together. Nice, nice, nice. But by the way, if you do this, if you do this, if you do this, I'm out of here. I'm not going to, do this with you. I'm going to divorce you the first day you do this to me. And they have all that mindset already. That's not how it works. Why? Because if you enter marriage and you're always with the fear that your spouse may leave you, then you are not developing the relationship on the foundation of love, but on the foundation of fear. See, that's why what Jesus says is so important, because this process is driven first by love for God, but secondly, is driven by love for the spouse. So if I love God and if I love my spouse, my fiance, my spouse to be, then I'm going to leave father and mother. And I'm going to make you now the new priority in my life. I am going to wait to honor marriage and be united to you as my spouse before we become sexually engaged with each other. I am going to become one with you, and I'm going to commit to that relationship for life until I die. That process is the process that leads to oneness, according to what Jesus said. Therefore, there are no longer two, but one. When? When these 4 steps have taken place. So I want you to think of 2 things. First is that I want you to think of marriage not as a change of relationship, but as a change of identity, oneness, purple. You have to learn a new way of life. And secondly, I want you to think of oneness as a process. There are steps that you need to follow to get there. If you do not follow those steps that are listed here, you're going to be pulled back and you will not be able to reach that point of oneness. So I hope this makes sense and is clear for you. So, closing question. As you look at these 3 different models, the partnership model that sees you as a platform to take me to the future I desire, but the moment it doesn't work, I'll just find another business partner. Or the 50-50 model, where this is so marked that this is mine, that's you, and everything is 50-50 here, because there's no oneness. Or are you using the oneness model, where rather than me and I and mine is we and us and ours? What is the most dominant dynamic in your relationship? If it's not oneness, chances are is that it's partnership model or 50-50 model, one of those 2. So as we conclude this first session, you will find true or false at the end of this section in the notes. So I'm going to go through it and see how you answer it. Answer it true or false. I honor my spouse's opinions and desires more than my parents. True or false? If my spouse's desires or plans conflict with my parents, I give priority to my spouse. True or false? I do not complain about my spouse with my relative or friends. I honor my spouse by talking positively about him or her with relatives or friends. I make fun of my spouse in front of other people in a way that puts him or her down. We do not depend financially on our parents. When we are financially tight, we often run to our parents for help. Ever since I married, divorce has never been an option in my mind. When dissatisfied with my marriage, I think of divorce as an option. True or false? Now you can see that in some of these assertions, some will apply to you if you're engaged, some others won't yet, but they will. And what you get from here is that you are already experiencing the tension with the relationship with the parents and the relationship with the spouse. So this is something I have for you, for those of you who are engaged and not yet married. If you have a close relationship with your parents, that's a blessing. Continue to nurture that and continue to honor that. However, now you will have to learn that the moment you say, I do, and you marry this person that you are engaged to, that person will become now a priority over your relationship with your parents. You have the choice to remain single. You don't have to get married. But if what you are seeking is oneness, start preparing yourself for that change. Because the time will come when you might feel that priority and that relationship tested. Which one is the most important one? So start thinking about in those terms, because your spouse is not going to be an attachment to your relationship with your parents and to your family and your siblings. No, there's not going to be attachment to that. Your spouse and you are going to be a whole different beast altogether. You're going to be purple now. So you better start preparing yourself to, like, with your mind, to start thinking, okay, I need to start learning how this purple thing works. So with that in mind, I'm going to conclude this session, and I'm going to stop the recording here, because I'm going to engage with those of you who are here right now with these last questions. Okay, so for those that were able to watch the recording, join us on Mondays at 7:30, and hopefully you will be able to continue the rest of the studies. We'll meet next week for session 2 of this course.